Hey there, and welcome to the Ditch That Textbook Digital Summit, where we are all about technology and pedagogy and that good, solid teaching that drives everything, those practical ideas that you can use in class tomorrow. My name is Matt Miller. I'm the host of the Ditch That Textbook Digital Summit, author of Ditch That Textbook. And usually at this point, I am introducing you to a fantastic guest that I'm always excited to have into one of these episodes, one of these sessions. But today you get me. And so I am going to be talking about something that I am passionate about as well. So what we're going to talk about today are the 6 practical ways, these practical ways that you can amplify learning with technology. And so these are some of those things that I have seen in my own classroom and in other people's classrooms that go beyond just using technology for the sake of using technology. You know, sometimes we're just looking to try to fit it in, to plug it in, to find ways where it fits. But these are some of those examples of places where you can really see a difference in the learning and in the long-term impact that students have on them. So we're going to be touching on a lot of stuff in this session today. So buckle up. I know there's going to be lots of practical takeaways for you. So let's just jump right into this. So 6 practical ways to amplify learning with technology. So to kick this off, let's ask this question. When you think of technology in the classroom, what does it make you think? Think about that for just a second. What does technology in the classroom make you think? You know, I've gotten to ask a lot of teachers about this and to gauge their reactions in my presentations. And it seems like it comes down to several things here. For some, it's overwhelm. And you may be in that camp, you know, thinking about there's so much that we can use. You know, there's so many options and it's hard to know where to start. And the beauty of it and the hard part about it is that tomorrow there's going to be even more. And so, you know, where do we start? How do we keep up? For some people, they want to know that it's meaningful. They want to make technology use in the classroom meaningful. And they ask, you know, how do I know this is a good fit? How do I know this is going to work? How do I know that this is actually going to, you know, make a difference? And for some, they want to make sure that it'll move the needle for learning. Like whenever they compare the way that they were teaching before to the way that they teach with the technology, they want to know that learning is improved. And so imagine for just a second, what if we had some clarity? Wouldn't clarity be wonderful? What if we had some clarity on what makes for meaningful use of technology in the classroom? Like what does make it meaningful? Imagine if we had some practical examples that we could follow. And imagine if we could see the big picture of why it works so we can actually do it ourselves. So we can kind of like reverse engineer it and create some of these meaningful activities ourselves. And if that all sounds pretty wonderful, then you are in the right place. I just realized I haven't even introduced myself. Well, I guess I did a little bit here at the beginning. So let me tell you a little bit about me. My name's Matt Miller. I am, again, the host of the Ditch That Textbook Digital Summit. I've written a couple of books, Ditch That Textbook, which is a book with tens of thousands of copies in print and digital. I'm also the author of Ditch That Homework, which I co-authored with Alice Keeler. I'm a co-host of the Google Teacher Tribe podcast, which I do on a weekly basis with Casey Bell of Shake Up Learning, who you can see in the Ditch That Textbook Digital Summit. She has 2 presentations that are available as of this recording, at least. I have gotten the pleasure of presenting to teachers at hundreds of events, thousands of teachers all over the United States and beyond. I've been to Canada, I've been to Australia, just recently did a virtual presentation in Austria. So lots and lots of teachers that I've gotten to interact with. But even though I've turned my focus to helping and empowering teachers right now, for me, it all started in the classroom, you know, in a little bitty high school Spanish classroom in rural West Central Indiana. And I taught every single level of high school Spanish. And some of my favorite memories and moments of my entire life and education came right out of that classroom. And so now, like I said earlier, I've pivoted to teaching teachers, empowering teachers, helping teachers, because I do like to try to reach students through the things that I can help teachers to do. but you still can't totally get me out of the classroom. My wife is a high school social studies teacher. And so every once in a while, I'm like, hey, can I borrow your students? Can I try this cool thing out that I've been wanting to try? I get to sub at my kids' elementary schools. So that gives me some experience from the sub perspective, from the elementary perspective, after having spent my entire career in high school. So, and when I think back on some of those early years when I had very first started teaching, and I think back about the way that I was using technology, I started with access to a computer lab. I didn't have devices in my classroom. Actually, I think I had maybe like 2 or 3 of them in the back, and they were old desktop computers. There was no whole lot that I could do with them. Eventually, my school ended up with those rolling laptop carts. Have you ever dealt with these before? They're like as big as a tank and just as heavy. And you try to push them down the hallway with students all in the way, and it's like every ounce of your being to push them. With ours, they got flat spots in the wheels, so it got really, really hard to push. But I would get those into the classroom and then would, be excited about using them. And we didn't even have Google accounts for all of the students yet, but I was one of those ones that went rogue. And I set up some Google accounts that my students can use that weren't official school ones. I don't recommend that now, but that was kind of my way into, using some of these Google tools that we use so often now, because I saw the potential and the power and the possibility, and I was impatient and I didn't want to wait around. And so I started thinking there at the beginning, I thought, any technology has got to be good technology in the classroom. And I'd heard all about how, more and more technology was rolling into the schools, and I wanted to get on board and I wanted to do some things with it. And I thought, kids like technology. It's engaging. I think it kind of makes me an innovative teacher to use technology. And so I would set my students up in a room kind of like on this slide, either at the computer lab or with those rolling laptop carts. And I would stand back and I would look across the room and I think, look at all of those students working on those computers. And I kind of like fold my arms and be like, maybe we need to get the principal down here to see this, or the superintendent. Or maybe we ought to like send a picture of this to the local newspaper or something. And I kind of like felt pretty good about myself until I started thinking about what the kids were doing. And early on there, when I didn't know any better, it was kind of like taking the mindless worksheets that we had on paper and turning them into mindless worksheets on laptop computers. And after a little while, after the glow had kind of faded from using those computers, I started to think, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way to do this. And thankfully, through my career, I've learned a lot through trial and error, sometimes painful error, and have a lot of things that I'd love to be able to share with you related to all of this. So we are going to cover a whole bunch of stuff. I'm going to try to give you lots of things that you can use without hopefully going too fast and totally overwhelming you. So here's what we're going to be talking about in this presentation. We'll talk about the 3 tips for success when you use technology in the classroom. We're going to look at the 6 places where technology really moves the needle for learning, the title of this presentation. These are some of those places in my own classroom and in other people's classrooms where I've seen it really succeed. And we'll talk about the 5 keys to evaluating technology in the classroom to figure out what needs to be in my classroom, what's good, what's not so much. And we'll also take some time to look at the big picture too, how to use technology so it's meaningful and so it enhances learning. And so let's dive right into this. Let's get to the first part. These are 3 tips for tech success. So after having had those students in those classes with the laptop computers and eventually, migrating to a one-to-one Chromebooks and Google Apps accounts and all of the different things that come with that, these are sort of like the 3 big picture things that I want you to take away and maybe keep in your mind as you're looking at your own use of technology in the classroom. So here's the first one. I think, and I've alluded to this already, and this is kind of a running thread through the whole thing. I think we've got to be willing to ask ourselves, does this move the needle for learning? And you may have heard me say that earlier. And so here's what I really mean by that, is that sometimes I fear that as teachers, we will use technology and we think, I'm going to continue to teach the way that I taught before. but if I plug some technology into it, that'll make it better, right? It's almost like we take our lesson plans and we want to sprinkle this magical technology fairy dust over the top of them, and maybe something magical will happen. And then what happens is we have the same kind of lessons being taught and being learned through different means, and nothing really changes. And I think that whenever we use technology in the classroom, if we're using it, to its potential, if we want to get the most bang for our technology buck, so to speak, I think we've got to ask ourselves, can it take learning to the next level? I mean, technology is expensive and it takes some time to get used to. And so I think we've got to be willing to ask ourselves, is there a measurable difference to what we're doing now compared to what we did before? And when I say a measurable difference, I don't think it has to be like points on a standardized test. There are lots of ways that we can see success, but I think we've got to keep our eyes open to that. So that's number one. Does it move the needle for learning? Here's number two. I've learned that it's a good thing not to let too many digital tools into your classroom. And I have very much succumbed to seeing all of the new flashy gadgets and websites and digital tools and apps. And I start thinking, ooh, I want to use that. Ooh, that looks really cool. And then I start to see other teachers that are using it. And then I get this doubt that starts to creep inside of me. And I start to think, am I doing my students a disservice if I don't use that? Because I'll see, especially when I get on social media, I'll see so many great teachers doing different things with different apps and websites and everything. And I think whenever we let too many things into our classroom, it makes our students as overwhelmed as we are. And sometimes it's hard to keep all of the features and all of the actions and everything straight. So I think whenever possible, if we can minimize the number of tools that we put in front of our students and try to find those really robust ones that can do a lot of things, I think that's probably the ideal. Instead of trying to find a brand new app or website for something, I think that's what we want to do. Is I like to use Google Slides because you can use it for a million different things. You can use it to make stop motion animation. You can use it for a shared collaboration space for all of your students. There's a lot of things you can do just on one single slide. The choose your own adventure stories. The list goes on and on of all the things you can do with Google Slides. And so I think that's a good example of, instead of getting lots of tools, let's focus on the ones that make the most impact and kind of double down on those. Here's number three. I think we've got to be willing to go to our students' world too. And I've always found it interesting whenever I listen into my students' conversations, or if I start asking them about what apps or what things in pop culture they're interested in, a lot of times it clues me into things that we can use in class, And I think if we can find ways to bring elements of that in, even if we don't use the app that they're using, if we can create the experience that goes with it, I think that can be good too. I remember years ago when I was teaching, Vine was the big app of the moment. Vine were these 6-second looping videos. And I started to realize we could make little short videos. It kind of gets the idea of the experience. We could just shoot those on iPads or on mobile devices or whatever. And so if I tell the students we're making Vine videos, even if we don't use the Vine app, we're still kind of getting at that experience. And so whenever we know what the student's world looks like and what they're interested in, I think there's some inherent interest that can come with that. So with that said, how can we do all of that? What are some practical examples of some of those things? Well, that's exactly what I've got for you. So let's take a look at some of those practical examples. Some of those places where I've seen technology move the needle for learning myself. And so that's what I've got for you here, are 6 ways to amplify learning with technology. This is what you came for. This is what the title was all about. And of course, the great thing about all of this, I'm going to show you examples from all of these 6 areas. Just remember, just keep this in mind. You don't have to use all of them. You don't even have to use multiple ones of them. If it comes down to it and you find one thing that will move the needle for learning in your class, go with it. Just take that one thing and run with it. The goal here is not to make you feel overwhelmed, but I've always felt that it's kind of empowering to think one thing. Yeah, I can do one thing. If you ask me to do 14 different things, that's a lot. But if you ask me to do one thing, I can totally do that. So see if you find something that can be your one thing from this presentation. All right, let's dig into it. Here's the first one. The first one is to take them there, to take our students there. And I think there's something to be said about going somewhere in person. You get to a location, whenever you travel, you go someplace beyond your home and you get to experience it with all of your senses. And you have a new appreciation for a place whenever you get boots on the ground in that location and you take it all in and you look around and you smell and you just experience the whole place. And I think that can be powerful. But of course, we can't take our students everywhere in, our country or everywhere in the world or even within our state. But there are lots of great tools that will let you do that, and many times in an instant. And one of my favorite ways to do it, a quick win, and this is something that I share in my full day workshops with teachers all the time. And I'm still amazed that whenever I ask people, how many of you know about this? A lot of times it's kind of 50-50, that there's a lot of people that don't know about this. But this is a quick win. This is something that you can start using immediately without your students needing to log in, without having to download anything or set anything up ahead of time. You can just fire it up and use it. It's Google Maps Street View. And if you've seen this before, then I've got some applications for it. But if you haven't, here's kind of how it works, is that you go to Google Maps. You just go to maps.google.com, and you will notice down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, if you're using a laptop or a Chromebook or something like that, you'll notice that there's this little yellow peg man. And what's interesting is if you click on the little peg man and drag him onto the screen, all of the streets will turn blue, or at least the ones that you can use. And if you drop him down on one of those streets, you can see what life looks like from the street. It's got all these panoramic images that were taken by the Google Maps car that has a panoramic camera on top of it, and it takes all of these pictures all over the world. And so really what this becomes is an on-demand virtual field trip. You can drop your students right there, wherever it is that you want to go study, as long as the Google Maps car has been there, or as long as there's some sort of image from there. Now, what's cool about it is that, you see, it's called Street View, Google Maps Street View, but you don't just have to use it on the street. You can go inside lots of buildings and tour them as well. And this is one of my favorite places to tour. This is Alcatraz, the famous prison in San Francisco Bay. And so I'll drop the little yellow guy down here, and it looks like this. So this is what it looks like. And of course, you can click up and down through the prison to kind of like walk the halls of it. You can zoom in on things. What I love about this too is that you can zoom inside of the cells inside of Alcatraz, but this map or this poster that you see up here, that's something that you can zoom in on. And so if you zoom in, you can see all of the text. So it's almost like, if you think about touring someplace like Alcatraz, if you could read the posters and walk around and see everything up close, this is pretty close to just as good as an in-person field trip. This is like a virtual field trip. So on that poster, it talks about the escape from Alcatraz and how they were able to get out digging out with a spoon. And that's the kind of stuff that you can read on there. And so when it comes to museums and all sorts of big landmarks, and sometimes even businesses have places where you can walk around on the inside of them. The White House has that as well. You can drop yourself down in the White House and walk around a lot of it. And so when it comes to taking students there and giving them that rich, almost like feet on the ground experience, there are lots of different tools that you can use. We were just talking about using Google Maps and using the Street View, but it goes beyond that. You can see with Google Earth, you can see the world in more of a 3D from the sky type of approach. You can use Google Maps Treks, which uses the Street View, and it takes you to these amazing locations, like dozens of these amazing locations around the world, and gives you kind of like a personal guided tour. My Maps is what you can use to create your own maps and mash all of this stuff up together. And then, of course, we can go into the VR and AR world. And if you have even one single virtual reality viewer, something like Google Cardboard, you can load up Street View, and it makes you feel like you're actually there. And then, of course, there's Google Expeditions, where you can take your students on a guided tour of lots of amazing places on their own devices. And so lots and lots of possibility here to take students there. So my big question for you here is, where could your students go and how could you let them go explore with something like this? So that's number one, that's take them there. Here's number two. Number two is to change instruction and feedback. And I think that having devices in our students' hands and in our own hands as teachers, it gives us an opportunity to do things differently. And so if it gives us the opportunity to do things differently, I think we should. And so in that case, instruction can look a lot different too. And so instead of doing the teach from the front of the room to everybody approach, now we have the opportunity to make learning a little more student-centered. And then we can also, as far as feedback goes, we can give more timely and more personalized feedback using technology and using other things without technology too. But I think that's kind of the focus here, is how can we do instruction differently? Maybe so it's more student-centered. And then how can we provide more timely in-the-moment feedback? Now, one of my favorite examples to change the way we do instruction digitally is to use Pear Deck. Now, if your school has access to Nearpod, you can do pretty much everything I'm going to talk about here on Nearpod as well. Pear Deck is just the one that I always default to. And here's the general idea behind it, is that with Pear Deck, you create presentation slides. And so you can see on my screen here, in this presentation, if you look at all of the thumbnails on the left, all of the slides that I made were just images and text. You know, that first one, this is kind of a fun presentation I do. I do this during my workshops too, where I found this research that has plotted onto maps how Americans pronounce and say different words differently. So for instance, the one that you see in front of you is y'all. You know, here in the United States, of course, we've got areas in the US where people will say y'all instead of you guys or you all, talking about multiple people. And so you can even see on slide 4 here where it's green, that's where they say y'all. And so I use this as an example of how you can do slides differently. Now, to create a Pear Deck presentation, it's pretty easy. All you do is just design your slides. So in this case, I put a bunch of pictures and a bunch of text onto my slides. And then once you're done with that, you can add the interactive features to it. So that includes adding questions where students type in an answer, where students put in a number to answer, where they do multiple choices. And then there are options to draw on a slide and even drag a little dot onto a slide. And so there's all these different ways to keep students interactive. And so I like to look at this as, how can I create slides differently? So I'm creating them for the students instead of for myself. I start to look at slides as, how can I create an interactive experience for my students instead of what are my talking points? Because I think anything that we do where we can put our emphasis back on the student and their experience, I think is time well spent. And so we design the slides and we hit this Present with Pear Deck button. And then whenever it comes up on the student's device, this is the way that it looks. And you can see I've kind of overlaid those different question types up there in the top right. And so this one happens to be a drawing one. This little overlay up here in the top right is where this shows you the different kinds of questions whenever you're designing your slides. But on the main screen here, this is what it looks like to a student. So in this case, I gave them the y'all map. And I said, hey, draw the border of where you think, kind of like the perimeter of where you think people say y'all. And so then they can take it and they can draw it in and we can look at everybody's drawings and everything. And so I love this and other things like this because we can give students that instant feedback. We can put their stuff right up there in the front and we can do instruction differently. Instead of just doing a one-size-fits-all type of teaching to everybody all at once. Now we can make it more interactive. Now we can give them that timely feedback. That's a big one, I think. Let's go on. Number 3 is to make creators and not consumers. Now, of course, in classrooms, consuming is important. You know, we still have content to learn and skills to learn, and students still do need to consume, and sometimes they need to consume by listening to the teacher. But we also have an opportunity to let them create. I feel like, you know, we're very much a society of consumers. If you think about all of the YouTube videos that people watch without ever creating one. And you think about all the radio and the music that we listen to without ever composing music. I think as the world turns and changes, I think that creators are kind of like going to inherit the world. There's going to be more and more opportunities for people who are willing to create, who know how to create. And of course, we also make meaning about the world around us whenever we let students create. So there's a great learning factor in this too. And so there are lots of ways to do this too. So I wanted to share with you one of my favorite examples. And so this is an activity that we do in Google Drawings. Google Drawings, of course, is one of the core tools in G Suite. And it's basically like a big digital poster board or a big digital sheet of paper. And so within that, you can add lines, text, shapes, images. That's about it. So just because there's so few moving parts, so few, pieces to this puzzle, the learning curve on it, I feel like, is pretty low. So there are a ton of really neat things that you can do with it, but this is one of my favorite ones, especially to help students create with what they are learning. And this is an activity I like to call Caption This. This is something that I developed with a teacher in Missouri named Laura Steinbrink. We kind of bounced the idea back and forth with each other and thought, hey, we ought to write a blog post about this. And so we actually blogged about it on the Ditch That Textbook blog. And so it's this idea that if you can get an image that has to do with the content that you're learning. In this case, I've got that famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware. And so we put that picture up there. In that case, students can do this. So if you tell your students, hey, open up a Google drawing, let's go search for that painting of Washington crossing the Delaware, stick it on your Google drawing. That's step one. I think a lot of times we get stuck in that low critical thinking, low Webb's depth of knowledge type of learning. I've got Webb's depth of knowledge up here on the screen. And so we'll get into fact regurgitation, fact recall. But there are little things we can do that don't take much prep. Did I just get your attention? Don't take much prep, right? Because anything we can do to save time is great. That can help our students think more deeply. And so I look at something like this and I think, how can we get to level 2 on Webb's depth of knowledge? And so one example from level 2 of Webb's depth of knowledge is look at something from another perspective. So if we've learned about the details of Washington crossing the Delaware, we might look at this picture and draw a couple of thought bubbles on. You can do this under the shapes. There's a callouts menu. And so you just put this up there. And the prompt to the students becomes, what do you think Washington was thinking as he was crossing the Delaware? Now what's great about that is that you have to have the basic understanding of the event first. So now we're going beyond fact recall. And we go on to level 2, which is looking at it from his perspective. And so in this case, I drew one in that said, are we crazy? And then the follow-up, the second part of that prompt could be, what do you think his crew was thinking, or the soldiers were thinking? And so we picked one out over here to the side and drew the thought bubble up above him. And that one says, I know we're crazy. It's like, hey, look at the ice. It's freezing cold out here. What in the world are we doing? And so that in and of itself, just that one little thing helps students to think at a little bit deeper critical thinking level. But then you can even take it to the third level. Again, very low prep. We're getting higher critical thinking without a bunch of prep time, which is great. And so you look at Webb's depth of knowledge in level 3, and part of it is to have students justify their response, explain their thinking. And so right down at the bottom of this Google drawing, you can see I've got a little sentence stem. I think Washington was thinking this because. Now they have to justify it. And even if they wrote something funny, and that's okay, if they can justify it and tie it back to real actual fact that they've learned, now all of a sudden we're up to level 3 in Webb's depth of knowledge. And now we're getting into some deeper critical thinking. This isn't, like an enormous big project, but it could be a really good bell ringer activity or something to have students stop and do after they've done a little bit of learning. So this is just another example of something that you can create. So I think that's the big question here is, what unique product can a student create to demonstrate their learning or to further their learning? And when I say unique product, it doesn't have to be something like groundbreaking, totally unseen to the education world. But if they can make something, a lot of times that's memorable. Let's go on to the next one. This is number 4, to empower student voice. And student voice is kind of a buzzword, especially around social media circles these days. And we're talking about giving students the opportunity to be heard, whether that's their ideas or it's their physical voice or whatever. And I think a lot of times in schools, we put a heavy emphasis on the written word, with the things that we have students write and read. But if we think about it, spoken word is used a lot in everyday life. I kind of got clued into this in the introduction to Eric Palmer's book, Well Spoken. And that was the claim that he made. And so how we use spoken word has a lot to do with how people interpret our own messages and how much their weight carries. So how we speak is important. But are we equipping kids with the skills to speak well in their real lives? And so I think we need to give them those skills and then give them opportunities to express their voice. And maybe they can express their voice through giving their opinion or their take on something so that they know that their voice is heard and it matters and it's important and it can be used to make change. That's kind of a big life lesson for students to be able to learn. And so there's a couple of places where I think we can do that in class. And this is one of my favorite ones, is to create a class podcast. And it's this tool that I really like. It's called Anchor. You can find it at anchor.fm. And they claim that it's the easiest way to start a podcast ever. And I created my own podcast using Anchor and did more than 100 episodes with it. And I have to agree, it is a really easy way because you're pretty much creating a podcast with one of these. With a cell phone or a mobile device. You can do it on a Chromebook or a laptop or whatever it is that you've got. And so imagine this. What if your class had a podcast? Whatever it is that you teach, if you have multiple classes during the day, if you have one class of kids for the entire day. And what if throughout the week you just recorded little short audio clips of students talking about what they're excited about, what they're learning, what it means to them, how they're putting it into the big picture of their lives and how they see the world. Just little by little, recording some of those things. At the end of the week, you take all of those clips, you publish them out as an episode on your podcast. And now, all of a sudden, your students are sharing what they've learned to a bigger audience than just you. And think about who might want to listen to that. Who could be the audience for that? Parents, other classes, other people at school, leaders in the community, relatives that don't live in the community. I mean, there's a wide variety of people that I think would want to listen. And so if students know that they've got that audience, that may motivate them in their learning, but it also shows them that they can take what they've learned and what they know and what they think and make a difference with it. So it's showing that bigger picture thing too. So that's one thing that I really like about that. There's another tool that's out there that's kind of a newer one. This is called Synth, and you can find it at gosynth.com. And what's neat about it is that it kind of replicates the spoken conversation, the spoken discussion in a digital way so that you can record a bunch of little audio clips and they're gathered together kind of about as close as you could come to a natural conversation. And it's something where students can record quickly and then listen to each other and keep things kind of organized in threads and everything. It's pretty neat. It is free. So if you want to check that out, that's at gosynth.com. But that's also another way that students can practice those speaking skills. So they can develop those skills so that their ideas, when it's time to share them, have the most weight and importance as they can, so that their ideas don't get looked over. Here's number 5, make face-to-face connections. This is something that if you've read the Ditch That Textbook blog or any of my books, you know that I'm very passionate about this. I'm just excited about the idea that we have the ability to reach just about anybody around the world, face-to-face, hear their voice in real time, using things like Skype, Google Hangouts, FaceTime, Zoom, a wide variety of things. And so if we have that access to people all over the world, think of who could pour into the lives of our students if we gave them the opportunity. And, if you look at what you can do with this in the classroom, there's so much. You can get, through a video call, you can get connected to another class, just like yours, and share your learning back and forth. on one call or throughout an entire year. You can invite guest speakers to your class. There's lots of people that would love the opportunity to reach out and help out students. But then you can also take these great virtual field trips, a lot of which are totally, totally free. And so I wanted to share with you a couple of examples that I really love related to all of this. And, for me, I was able to get my own students in my own Spanish classes connected to another class of English learners in Valencia, Spain. This is one of my favorite stories to tell. And I wanted them to do it because I wanted them to practice their language skills with some native speakers. But what I didn't realize is that it would change their worldview, because my students in very rural West Central Indiana were interacting with these kids on the other side of the world that didn't look like them, didn't sound like them. And the more that they interacted, they realized that a lot of their daily actions and the way they lived their lives were different. But they also saw how similar they were. And they started to see that people are it's just like people are people, It's like what Maya Angelou says. We're more alike than we are unalike, And my students got to see that face to face. And some of my favorite stories from education come from this. I've got Gina Ruffcorn's picture on here. Her students got to hear from a couple of different places. One was a place, a preserve where cheetahs were being kept. And the students learned how great it was that people were able to see cheetahs because of this preserve. The next week, they talked to somebody who was part of an association that was for preserving wild animals in the wild. And they said preserves like that are such a bad idea because they have negative consequences on the animals. And so Gina's class of fifth graders got off of that call and they're like, well, what are we supposed to believe? It was this great learning moment where she said, that's not for me to decide. These are some of those questions that you'll have to wrestle with. It was such a great moment. It was so powerful. It was something they never would have gotten out of a textbook. Mike Soskel's class teamed up with a bunch of other classes around the world to provide water filters to kids in Kenya because they met them in a video call. And Todd Shriver has this class, this amazing elective class called The History of the 80s. Let that sink in for just a second. There's an elective history class called The History of the 80s. And he teaches it by getting video calls with all of the luminaries of the 80s. He's had Malcolm Jamal Warner from The Cosby Show. He's had several VJs from MTV. He even got the captain of the U.S. Olympic hockey team that won the Miracle on Ice in 1980, Mike Eruzione. He comes in to talk to their class virtually pretty regularly. So there's a wide variety of things. The other picture I have for you on here is a video call a class in Indiana got with Shaquille O'Neal. And it was just because one of their students sent him a fan letter. And she actually got a letter back and Shaq said, what if we Skype with your school? And so Shaq talked about the importance of having a dream, pursuing that dream, but not giving up on it and maintaining that dream. And it was really cool. And of course, that's not something they would have ever thought that they could get unless they just asked. And so my big question for you is, who do you think you could get? Or who could you put what could you put your students in contact with through a video call that would create an amazing experience that they would remember? Here's the last one of the 6, is to harness the power of brain science. Now, I've become a little bit of a brain science armchair enthusiast. I don't have any sort of degree or anything in brain science, but I'm fascinated by it. And we've learned so much about how the brain works and how it learns. But not all of it has trickled down into the classroom. And so what we get sometimes are very well-meaning teachers who are actually giving students bad advice based on the way that the brain learns. And here's one of my favorite examples. It has to do with this thing called retrieval practice. And so if you think about the way that we often ask students to prepare for a quiz or a test, we ask them to go back over the notes, reread the material, reread your notes. And if you think about it, which way is the information flowing when you study like that? It's flowing into your brain. And research says that is not the most effective way to do it. It says what we want to try to do is this thing called retrieval practice, where we do what some people call anyway, a brain dump. of just pulling information and stuff that we've learned out of our brains. And that has a much more powerful impact on long-term learning. So being able to do those, and there's lots of digital tools that can let us do this too. You could do brain dumps through a Flipgrid topic, where students are doing video responses or just talking about everything that they remember about a topic. You can use Socrative.com, to let students you do a short answer question and let students type as many little short answers of the different things that they've learned. And seeing those brain dumps can be really powerful too. My go-to resource on this retrieval practice is retrievalpractice.org. It is a website maintained by Pooja Agarwal, who is a cognitive scientist who has done work on the K-12 level. And so much of her research plays back to that. And in fact, she was a guest in the Ditch That Textbook Digital Summit, and her video is available if you want to go check it out. She has a lot to say about this. And of course, you can check out her website at retrievalpractice.org. So those are your 6. Great ideas, right? Lots of things, lots of useful, practical things. Hopefully there's some things that sparked some things that you can use. And so I think when it comes to all of this, it's useful to see how other people teach, to get practical ideas, because it helps us come up with ideas. But whenever I present a bunch of practical things like this, I feel like it's an example of that old saying, if you give someone a fish, you feed them for a day, but if you teach them to fish, then you feed them for a lifetime. And so I want to help try to teach you how to fish. How can you not just take specific examples that I've given you and try to run with them, but how can you create your own stuff that's kind of in this same line? And so that's what the next part of this presentation is about. I wanted to give you, and we'll go kind of quickly through these, 5 ways to evaluate technology for learning. So if you want to use that technology to do it in meaningful ways, to create some of those lessons, what are some ways to evaluate it to make sure you're using it in the most effective way possible? So let's go through these 5. The first one I think is to start with the end in mind. And this goes right back to understanding by design. Makes me think of Stephen Covey's 7 habits. Just to remind yourself, what are your goals? What do you want students to be able to do after the activities that you do? And then how can we reverse engineer that goal to give them practice on those skills so that they can reach it in the end? I know this is probably something you've thought of before, but I always find that it's a good reminder to come back to that. How can we start with the end in mind? And I think if there are digital tools that can help our students to practice those skills that they're going to need for the end goals, it's always good to build a library of possible digital tools that you can use. And that's why I think it's important to be a learner all the time about what's out there, what kind of technology is out there, what are the tools that are available. And when we do that and we have that rich library to draw upon, as we do this process of looking at our goals and figuring out how can we develop those skills in students, then those digital tools start to pop to mind immediately. So I think that's an important part of important piece of the puzzle too. Gauge success of other teachers is number 2. The websites that I randomly stumble upon or I find in a Google search that I've never heard of before, I've had those blow up in my face a lot more than the things that I hear from other teachers that they're having success with. And so if there's not a whole lot of buzz around a certain digital tool or app or whatever, that's okay. That might not mean anything, but it might mean something. It might mean that there's a reason that nobody's using it. And so, I like to pay attention to social media, educator blogs, conversations with other educators to see what's working for them. And that helps me figure out what's going to be meaningful. Number 3 is to create an experience. This is one of my favorite pieces of one of my favorite teaching books of all time, Teach Like a Pirate by Dave Burgess. And the one quote that has always stuck out to me the whole time, and all of the times that I've read through it, is don't just teach a lesson, create an experience. Because it's those experiences that are going to stick with students. That's what will be memorable to them. And don't we want our classes and our things that we do in class to be memorable? And so some questions you can ask yourself there are, how can I create a wow factor? Can you bring in some of that VR? We were talking about Google Cardboard earlier, for that immersive experience. That's kind of like a wow factor. I've found that connecting with others through Skype, even with my too cool for you high school students, that would still get them excited. They'd grab me by the shoulder, almost like by the shirt, as I'm walking through the hall, and they're like, "Hey, Mr. Miller, are we doing one of those mystery Skype calls?" They get all excited about it. Games, role play, creating things. What is it that's going to create that experience? I think if you keep that in mind, that can be really powerful. Create engaging repetitions. For some things that students learn, we've just got to get those reps. We've got to have repetitions. We've got to have practice with it. And, it's kind of like shooting free throws. I'm from Indiana. Basketball always comes to mind. And you've got to develop that skill. But when it becomes drudgery, it just doesn't seem to stick in the same way. So how can we create engaging repetitions? For me, whenever we've used, Quizlet flashcards before, just playing the scatter game. Now you've got Quizlet Live, creating a leaderboard for students as they play those games to see who has the highest score. Bringing in a little layer of gamification, bringing those game elements in. Sometimes, it's just a little small adjustment to what you do, but it can have a huge impact on motivation, I think. And then here's the last one. Does this sound familiar? Create something. We were just talking about making creators instead of consumers. And I think this has got to be a lens that we look through, is how can we let our students create something that shows what they know, that shows what they've learned and how they understand it. Because it's good for us because it gives us a glimpse into their brains. But it's also good for them because it helps them to put the pieces together of how something actually works by doing it themselves. That's kind of at the heart of constructivism. That old idea from Piaget and constructionism. Seymour Papert. They talk about how the power of making things and how we're putting together our mental construct of what the world looks like based on what we make. And so I think that's a big question too. What can students make to demonstrate their learning or to help them to have a deeper understanding about something? So, to this point, I've talked about your 3 tips for technology success. We've had 6 ways to amplify learning with technology, 5 keys to evaluate technology for learning. There's been a lot of stuff. That's just 14 things right there on that list. So hopefully there's something that's been useful to you at this point. It's already had a ton of value, I hope, and I hope that this has been great for you. So to wrap this up, I want to go one more place, and I want to ask you, just imagine, what would it look like if you had your students creating, collaborating, remembering, and they're enjoying the process, And just as important, you're enjoying the process too. You feel like you've freed yourself to do that teaching that you love. You feel like you are teaching in a way that represents you and who you are and what you want your class to be. You feel like you're your own unique self in your instruction. So if you're looking to do that and you want to take your technology use to the next level, I have something that I want to share with you. So I've created an online course with all of my best resources and the inspiration that you'll need to help succeed with technology in the classroom. It's called the Tech to Learn online course, and it's based on the popular full-day workshops that I've done for years with teachers all over the United States and beyond. And so through all of these years, I've gotten to see what resonates with teachers, what doesn't, what they find useful, what they don't. And through all of these years, I've crafted this workshop. And basically, this is the online version of that workshop that gives you all of those things that the teachers have really loved throughout the years. And so it dives deep into the 6 ways that we can amplify learning with technology. We go into details on how to recreate those practical teaching ideas in your own classroom. But we also pull back into the big picture view and we look at, why does this work? How can I recreate this myself? Kind of like the teach you to fish so that you can eat for a lifetime type of thing. And so in this course, here's what you get. You get more than 4 hours of videos with me, face to face, talking you through the 6 ways to amplify teaching with technology. And each of those 6 modules includes a workbook. So it helps you think through how you can apply those ideas in your classroom. Actually get pen to paper and jot out some ideas. Or you can do it digitally, of course. Each module is filled with additional resources, including tutorial videos, how-to articles, and more. It's going to empower you to make technology use in your classroom even more meaningful. And I've had lots of people go through the course, and here's what some of them have had to say. And so Kelly from Houston, Texas says, the Tech to Learn course was the best PD I did this summer. The videos were engaging, and I really enjoyed the chance to try the skills I learned shortly after watching the videos. You watch the videos, you try the skills out. Also, I appreciate the fact that I can go back and watch the videos whenever I want to, because whenever you get this course, you do get lifetime access to it, which is nice. So here's what Vanessa says. She said, Tech to Learn was a great learning experience. It exposed me to a number of opportunities to grow in my craft. And that's what it's about, I think, is, looking at teaching as a craft and how can we improve it. From giving ideas, tools, and resources to fostering the implementations of those tools and resources, it was time well spent. Thank you, Matt Miller. Well, thank you, Vanessa. And finally, Marie says, sometimes all you need to make a change is to hear new ideas. And this course is full of new ideas and resources to help any level user take the first step towards changing their classroom practice. And so, what's great about right now is that you've got an excellent discount to be able to get this course. So the course usually sells for $198 throughout the year. That's kind of like the sticker price. However, if you buy during the Ditch Summit, which means that if you're able to buy before this summit closes, you can get it for $99 instead. That is a 50% discount. So you're saving a bunch of money. So if you're going to a conference, a lot of times conferences cost like 2, 3, 5 times that, more than this discounted rate. And so, of course, at the conference's end, you got to go home and implement the ideas just based on what you remember. But with the Tech to Learn online course, with all of the hours of video guidance and the resources and the workbooks and the step-by-step tutorials, you get lifetime access. Now, meaning I'm not planning on taking this course down anytime soon. As long as the course exists, you've still got access to it. And I will continue to improve the course too. And so, of course, if you have lifetime access and it improves, then you're going to continue to get those improvements and always have access to those. Now, if you lead professional development in your school and you think your school leaders might want to make this available to all of the teachers in your district, we can do even more discounts if you enroll multiple teachers at once. So just shoot me an email. It's matt@ditchthattextbook.com before the end of the summit. And if you get that email to me before the end of the summit, you'll lock in that discount, even if we complete the transaction after the summit closes. Now, I haven't even started talking about the bonuses yet. There are all sorts of bonuses. And these are the kind of bonuses where you might think, wow, this is in addition to the course. This is the kind of stuff that I would pay for, just to get the bonuses. And so here's what you get when it comes to bonuses. The course includes these 4 bonus mini modules on these high interest topics when it comes to using technology in the classroom. And the topics include, number 1 is free up precious time, which is all about teacher productivity, how we can become more efficient to save time for what matters most to us. Addressing cheating in today's classroom, which identifies the struggles of teachers and the temptations of students and what we can do about it. Number 3, tapping into unlimited ideas, which talks about the importance of community among teachers, how to get connected with other educators, where to find tons of teaching ideas, inspiration, and mindsets about education. And then finally, making your tech dollars stretch, which is all about finding money for the things your class can't do for free, and why we should consider investing in digital tools that make a difference that aren't free. I've also included an apps crash course, mini course on Google Drawings and Google Slides. So this how-to course shows you the ins and outs of Google Drawings and Google Slides, including a lot of those features that make you say, why didn't anyone teach me that? I thought this would be a useful bonus for this course since so many of the ideas in the Tech to Learn online course can be brought to life with Google Drawings and Google Slides. So this gives you some of that practical stuff. And then there's yet another mini course, one on getting clear about your goals with technology and how to do it meaningfully. It unpacks some of the big picture ideas we talked about in this very video, like the 5 ways to evaluate tech for learning. Now, if you're thinking, man, this seems like a pretty low price, it almost seems too good to be true, because a lot of times online courses can cost multiple hundreds of dollars. And that's part of my philosophy and what I do with teachers, to try to equip teachers. See, it's my mission to provide tons of value at a reasonable price because my big goal is impact. I want to empower teachers with great ideas that can lead to amazing learning because I know that students benefit. And if I can reach teachers with lots of great ideas at a reasonable price, then I know I can reach exponentially more students. And I know that's how we slowly change the world, through our students. So that's the reason I do what I do. So when you get the Tech to Learn course and all of its bonuses, what are you really getting? I think you're getting transformation. You're unlocking your potential to create tech-infused lessons that boost learning that's already happening in your class. You're getting a wealth of ideas to use right away or to spark your own ideas. Imagine the engagement. That look in your students' eyes when you know that they love what they're doing and that they're learning deeply. Imagine that feeling of empowerment that you will feel knowing that you can do this. You can create these kinds of experiences in the classroom, that these ideas aren't too much for you. Imagine that new burst of energy about teaching that you get when you find those new ideas that you're excited about. I think that's really what you end up getting through this. So remember, this deal doesn't last long. You get the 6 modules on amplifying learning with technology and their accompanying resources and workbooks, the 4 mini modules on high interest topics. You get the Apps Crash Course mini course, and you get the Meaningful Tech Use mini course, and you get lifetime access to it. The price of this course goes back to its regular price, $198, which is the double the price you can get it for now at the end of the summit, at the end of the day, at the end of the summit. So, are you ready to get started? If you are, just click on the yellow button on the speaker page below that says Tech to Learn online course. Or if you're not on the speaker page, let's say you're on YouTube, you can go to ditch.teachable.com. Again, that's ditch.teachable.com to enroll in the course and to lock in the 50% savings. Now, if you have questions, if you've still got some of those lingering questions you want to get answered before you make a decision on this, feel free to email me, matt@ditchthattextbook.com, and I'm happy to answer them for you. So whether you're interested in joining me on this course or not, I hope this presentation on the practical ways to amplify learning with technology has been useful to you, that you've come away with some ideas that you can use right away and some clarity on how to use that technology in meaningful ways. And I'd love to see you in the course. Remember, the discount is only available until the end of the summit, so don't miss out. So thanks again for joining us on this session of the Ditch That Textbook Digital Summit. And I will see you